Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 26 of the Current Review podcast. Today we have on Grayson Eady, and he is a former charging interoperability engineer at Rivian, and he is now the founder of EVision Mobility, which is a consultancy group working on electric vehicle charging solutions. And I think this is really interesting and definitely worth a conversation today. So, Grayson, before we begin, what are some big ideas that you learned at Rivian and how have they impacted you?
Yeah, that's a great one. First, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk more about EV charging. I would say the biggest thing I learned at Rivian, it maybe seems like a smaller idea, is how to move fast with a small group of really passionate people. And that's kind of what steered me towards going to work for myself as I wrap up grad school and look to what's next, is the ability to get a group of people who are all very passionate about, say, EV charging and are interdisciplinary and willing to work fast. And you can do a lot with a really scrappy team. And charging was never the most emphasized or largest org at Rivian. And so that was kind of always the atmosphere is maybe we don't have all the resources, but we can work really well together and move really fast.
I'd be curious, how much did you guys look to Tesla and what Tesla had done with the supercharger network? Because I think I personally think they did a great job sort of laying out the framework that in order to make EVs and selling EVs successful, you also have to simultaneously invest a lot into supercharging infrastructure or charging infrastructure in general. How much did that strategy influence the way things were done at Rivian and how you guys looked at things? For instance, like building charging or designing chargers from the ground up, because you guys didn't use any other manufacturers or partners. Is that correct?
Yeah, the chargers were fully vertically integrated. It's hard for me to say in terms of grand strategy how much Tesla influenced. I was an intern back in the days of those big decisions being made, but I think it's undeniable that Tesla is this large influential player in the business. And they did something previously unimaginable by making this massive charging network that allowed rapid deployment of vehicles because everyone had confidence they could always find a supercharger. And I think that's definitely an influence on charging or automotive companies today that are looking at charging. But something that I think is unfortunately not quite fully understood is just how relatively easy first-party experience is. And so Rivian, in my experience, kind of had a similar path where the first goal was get a charging experience that works really well for Rivian customers. And Tesla did the same with Tesla customers. That's a big challenge, but it is not everything. And that's a lot easier than an experience that's interoperable. And so I think while Rivian followed the same path of designing a charging solution that was good for Rivian customers and kind of an add-on amenity to attract more customers, there was always this look towards, okay, but how can we make the charging experience just as good for everyone? And that led to some challenges as the open network product came about, but it ultimately ended up with a really cool spot as I left with them launching the network.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been seeing the Rivian Waypoint chargers popping up everywhere, so that's really cool.
Yeah, the level 2 deployment is crazy. There's even some in my small Georgia hometown.
Yeah, no, in Charlotte too. I guess Charlotte's kind of a big city now, but they're there too. So I think one thing, we met in person at the IONNA charging. It was like the soft opening. I think they recently did their like larger grand opening.
Yeah, it was the pre-opening event, I guess they call it.
Yes, pre-opening event with pretty good food.
Yeah.
But when we were there, like, what did you think of when you saw IONNA's flagship station? And what do you think about their overall strategy? Because it's very interesting and I'm pretty excited for it. So do you have any overarching thoughts on IONNA?
Yeah, I think the first thing I thought is, wow, it looks so retro and reminiscent of like the old racing light blue and orange. And I like that they were hearkening back to some kind of motorist dream of a service station. But in terms of charging, I thought that they are approaching it with a clear head. I think Iona seemed to be very focused on the user experience and simplicity. And I think too often in the EV charging industry, there's a focus on how do we have this cool new feature? How do we get plug and charge working? How do we get bidirectional charging working? And those are really cool ideas, and I'm sure eventually they'll be more ubiquitous. But I was in first interacting with those chargers, just taken aback how stripped down the experience was to just be very simple.
Interesting. And I remember you were able to kind of break one of the chargers with just doing a bunch of different like not like button presses. So you were able to get something interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think it's funny because you're just so used to these chargers, and you can find out the little things to do like that.
Yeah, I tell people I've seen pretty much every charger deployed in the US, and I have done way more plug cycles with all of them than any one person should. And so I feel like I've kind of got a sense of what is the frustrated customer path. That was the kind of thing I would do on a day at Rivian where I wanted to really make sure we were thinking of everything, as I'd go out and just do every random interaction with the charger that a customer might do in frustration trying to get it to charge. So with Iona, a front-loaded credit card payment where you pay first and then plug in, which is an easy way to avoid a lot of issues. So I was really pleased with that. But I realized that they still have a lot of button interactions between paying and plugging in. You could do it back, you could cancel. So picturing the customer that maybe swiped the wrong card, I started to press all the buttons on the screen, trying to get out of the charge session, and got to a state where the credit card reader was still wanting me to plug in, but the charger itself was back to the main screen prompting me to pay. And so that was something I noted in my LinkedIn write-up and noted in my feedback form, is it's very easy when you have completely distinct payment terminal and charger that's not fully integrated. They don't have integrated state machines. They're kind of a back-end integration, which I'm pretty sure what they did to have a little bit of mismatch, but relatively small thing. And I'm hoping that they can work through a lot of those kinks with the pre-charge event and early users.
Do you think, I mean, you had mentioned sort of plug and charge as a shiny thing, right? That I know a lot of people in the industry talk about like, oh, well, everything's going to be solved when you have plug and charge, but it's easy to say that. It's a lot harder to actually implement, right?
Right.
But I will say, I mean, Tesla led the way with plug and charge immediately, pretty much. And now, you know, that they've opened up their superchargers to a lot of other OEMs, and other people are experiencing the supercharge experience, which is plug and charge for them as well. Do you think that that's because they've led the way and they're so superfluous in the industry that is how things are going to go, and maybe that we just have to figure that out better and faster?
I do think the industry will probably go that direction. I don't know that we'll see it be the payment solution that every automaker and every charging company goes for a few years. But plug and charge has become a phrase almost without meaning. Initially, it's referencing a specific communication pathway from the ISO 15118 spec. And that experience has now been deemed plug and charge. Of you plug in your car and it starts charging, it recognizes your account and all that. So Tesla had the advantage of, again, doing a first party implementation where they could do their own proprietary way of recognizing accounts that was probably less complicated than the ISO standard, and doesn't require, you know, these third party business agreements to work out billing. But it did create a pretty large impact on the industry, where you have a lot of Tesla drivers and people who have seen Teslas are familiar with this idea now of, oh, I should just be able to plug in and walk away. I do think it's a cool feature. I don't think that figuring it out is the best way to make EV charging really good in the short term. There are some groups that are working on how to make plug and charge less complicated and more interoperable. SAE had a working group working on it that they just announced a few months ago, who knows the status of it now, that with the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation in the federal government, they were launching this effort to get a bunch of companies on board with an interoperable plug-in charge. And I think that something like that could be in the future, where there's a certified trust list. Everyone's account can be recognized by every charger. But in the very near term, as cool as plug-in charge is, I think people want an experience that's familiar and just as reliable as anything else they pay money for. And so focusing on really good credit card integration, I would say is top priority for improved charging experience, well above kind of the cooler features that make charging maybe a tad more seamless. I think about Apple Wallet and Apple Pay. I enjoy it. I like using it. But still a good 80% of the time, I don't remember that I have it, and I reach in my wallet and then swipe my credit card, right? And I think that's kind of how I view plug and charge right now, is we need to focus on the pathway that the majority of people, not just the majority of early adopter EV users are used to, but the majority of people are used to, which is when I buy something, when I buy fuel, I tap or swipe my credit card, and then it works flawlessly.
It's interesting that you say that, and I think I agree with that for the most part. But Iona, which I'll have to say, give them credit for, are the first sort of OEM-backed charging network solution that is going beyond just the chargers and also doing the in-store retail stuff as well. But I saw recently, I haven't experienced it myself, but they've implemented the Amazon cashierless technology, with the grab and go stuff.
Yeah.
And they've sort of said that that's the path for the in retail, which is the exact opposite of what you've just said for the in-store stuff. So it's like, we're going to accelerate it over here, but not over here. It just, it seems weird. I mean, I don't know. Like, I could applaud them for trying to be more forward thinking. But then to your point, like there's a bit of a mismatch in terms of expectations and experiences. If you have one that's kind of contactless checkout, pre-set up accounts and that sort of thing, and the other one where it's like old school credit card machine,
Yeah. I think there's definitely an argument to be made that it's cool to use these charging sites as a test bed for some new technologies. But I'm a big believer in driving the EV experience, not backwards. I don't mean to say that that we should be dumbing it down for folks or making it less technologically advanced than it could be. But I do think that it needs to be approachable. Like I had an experience where I was at a public charging site, and I was with my wife. We're on a road trip, and we noticed after a few minutes of charging that an older lady was sitting a few charging stalls down from us and really struggling to get a charge going. I don't want to go over and always explain to people, because it's none of my business sometimes, right? But I saw that she was having a lot of trouble and walked over and asked if I could help her start her charge. And she had a car that could do plug and charge, a station that could do plug and charge. And there was a negative balance on the account of the owner of the vehicle. She was a driver of the vehicle, not the owner of the vehicle. And she had no way to resolve that, and was just plugging in and plugging out and plugging in and plugging out, because the person on the customer service line was telling her that she should be doing plug and charge. And really, the best way with this particular station would have been for her to go into her app on her Android and start the charge from there. Well, she has an Android from 5 years ago with a screen that's barely working. And it is hard for me to navigate the app and put in the credit card. And really, this all would have been solved if you had somebody who's maybe not used to removing and adding payment forms in the app, maybe not used to the idea that it's going to recognize her account, or have the intuition to know how to self-clear some error like that with negative balance. If she just had a credit card machine, could have done it. And instead, this customer might not buy an EV again. And so I think I'm not a big advocate for keeping a lot of payment methods supported, because that's what a lot of the industry does now, is give too much choice. And then half the methods are really not well implemented. But I definitely will always make the case of a strong credit card implementation alongside plug and charge.
Yeah. I mean, at least just having that backup method there that you can use in case of something else. But actually, in one slightly different scenario, I still support having the credit card reader there. There's actually one case where the credit card reader wasn't working on the charging station, and it was a blink charger. That was actually, I was interoperability testing it at Lucid, and it's the middle of, I forgot where in California, but that's besides the point. But the credit card reader wasn't working, so I downloaded the Blink app, made a Blink account really quickly, and I was actually able to initiate the charging station on the app. But I really like having the ability that you can do it in multiple ways. Like if there is plug and charge, that is one way. If you can initiate it from the app, that's another way. And then if all else fails, you can just use a credit card.
I mean, what do you guys think about like an attendant? That's one thing that I always thought was odd. That at gas stations, there's usually someone that's around either in the store or in New Jersey, they're freaking everywhere.
Right.
And then even still, like if I think about a lot of self-serve stores or scenarios, like at the grocery store, when they have the self-checkout, there's at least one person there to assist when things go wrong or you need an ID check or something. And they have like an override, code and access to do certain things that other people can't. I know it's an additional cost, but it really, I think, would help people to have an attendant or a helper nearby to at least help during these transition periods,
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that because there is such a conscious move away from that in the EV charging industry. Like you mentioned, Andrew, even moving away from having anybody in the stores on site. There's not too far from me, about half an hour north, is one of the Mercedes-Benz charging hubs.
Yeah.
And they have this very cool, very futuristic shipping container store thing next to the charge point chargers there. And it's and it took up the entire back wall. It's a massive vending machine for coffee, soda, snacks, everything. And I guess they restock it every once in a while. But there's no one there, and it's just kind of tucked back in there with no attendant whatsoever. But yeah, it doesn't seem like many folks are going that direction. But I think you're right that sometimes, like I did for the woman I ran into in that road trip, just having someone who can guide you through it without taking you through a customer service flow chart or
being a normal human being.
Right. Just being a normal human touch. But it's probably additional costs, and it's also important to have people who have a lot of charging experience themselves. I think that's my frustration with a lot of the industry right now is often folks making decisions don't own EVs themselves, don't.
That really blows my mind and actually kind of upsets me.
At Lucid, I don't think anyone on my team at Lucid actually drove an electric car. All of them drove gas cars. And I'm like, what the heck? I'm like, you guys are working in charging validation and no one's driving an electric car, which is just crazy.
No, I know. There was someone who was a few levels above me in the charging org who was telling me that he was excited to charge in public for the first time. I'm like, you're a leader in how have you have an R1S? How have you?
Yeah.
So that's why I tried to be on the voice of the customer as much as I could as someone who has been that frustrated customer.
Mm-hmm. Now, on the topic of voice of the customer, like you just mentioned, we actually had a guest on, Brad Christ, who is working with like AI solutions and charging. Okay, I assume you're familiar with him based on that. Yep. But I think that's a really interesting route because if you have data from the charging station, you could determine like the key swipes or keystrokes, whatever, that someone's done, if a cable was plugged in, etc., all that stuff. And then maybe if you could be able to use some AI tools to be able to correlate those actions the driver did with potential failure points that could be going on is really interesting. So have you ever done any like research in that area, or do you have any thoughts on that?
I haven't done a ton. Actually, Brad Chris is the first person who I've heard doing something like that. And I connected with him on LinkedIn a while back, but we recently actually had a coffee chat virtually. And I think it's a really cool idea. What I said to him was, I would appreciate that instead of waiting on customer service, but my frustration ramp rate is a lot steeper with a chatbot than a human being. And so I think there's something there for sure. I think that he has the potential to do it well, and he seems to be really approaching it from how do we get it embedded with partners so that we do have all access to all that data, and we can, instead of sending people, just having a chatbot send people through the same flow chart that the customer service person was going to send them through, actually understand how to change user interaction in a way that gets to charging. I think he's thinking about it the right way. But if it's not clear, and if it's not understandable, or it's taking a lot of steps for the customer to get started, it's going to get frustrating really quickly if it's not a person, right?
It's interesting because, I feel like EVs are a test bed for a lot of technologies for OEMs, like ADAS, right?
Right.
We talked a little bit about that. And a lot of EVs kind of have ADAS in it, and manufacturers are using it as a testing scenario. We were talking about, contactless payments and these, humanless experiences. And I think AI is going to help enable all that, including Brad's ChargeMate. But, I think most of the population that don't have EVs right now don't trust AI. To your point a little bit, like your ramp rate goes up faster when, and you kind of just go to the zero and say, talk to a person. Do you think that what we need right now isn't necessarily more efficient robots, but more people and more human touch? Or maybe it's a bit of both. And like, what does that look to you?
I think it's a bit of both. Most of my experience in this industry has been with Rivian. And so I've always been exposed to the software-defined vehicle. And I really believe in that trend in the industry, moving towards really well integrated software, as vertically integrated as possible, to curate an experience that doesn't rely on a lot of add-ons or vendors to make it good. So I always told people who complained that Rivian didn't have CarPlay, like, just sit in one. Because you'll realize pretty quickly you don't actually need CarPlay if you have a good infotainment system. But I think that has to be balanced by simplicity of human interaction. So have the car be really advanced, but leave a few buttons. Don't have the controls be so abstracted where I'm clicking through screens to do everything. Don't make it so unfamiliar that people don't understand how to interact with the charging experience, right? It doesn't have to look exactly like fueling up a car from the 90s for people to be comfortable with it. But I think there is a temptation to make everything very advanced for even the advanced user, and maybe a lack of understanding of what average people are looking for. Is we're all still walking around with iPhones and super advanced computers in our pockets, but it just needs to have a more simple interaction point, I think.
On a slightly different note, I would like to make a clip about this, and I am saying that in the podcast, but I always think this is really interesting, just learning about what's actually happening behind the scenes when you charge an EV. So could you kind of walk us through the ISO 15118 charging protocol? And for someone who plugs in their electric car, what's actually happening behind the scenes? What are the communications looking like?
Yeah. So admittedly, I am slightly more familiar with the older standard, the DIN 70121. That's what the majority of charging sessions in the world today, because plug and charge is not completely interoperable across all combinations of vehicle and chargers, are this DIN standard. But it's very similar for the ISO 15118 standard. So you plug in the vehicle, and the vehicle and charger are establishing a network connection through a process of finding the strongest signal. It's power line communication, so it's a little weird. It's using the pilot line, the pilot pin on the vehicle connector and the charger connector to run the signal, but the signal doesn't actually require a physical connection. once they've established a network connection, they're going to exchange some information, some identifying information, and then eventually exchange charge parameters, basically saying, I can charge at this rate, I have this voltage range in my battery pack, and I am at this state of charge. And the charger says, I can charge you at this rate. This is my voltage range. If they are within range of each other, they then look for authorization for the charging session. Normally that takes the form of the charger pinging its backend through the OSPP protocol to see if the charging session can be authorized, whether it's from a credit card tap or from plug and charge, if we're doing ISO 15118. And then that's when it gets to some more fancy electrical stuff. So the first thing that'll happen is the charger will set the highest voltage that it expects in the session. The vehicle has not closed its contactors yet, and so there's just voltage at the connector of the charger, but not going to the battery pack of the car yet to test for any isolation failures. After it determines that it's safe to charge, then the charger will try and match the voltage that the vehicle is requesting. We call it pre-charge state. It's pre-charging to the right voltage. And once that voltage is within range, the vehicle will close its contactors and current will start flowing. The added steps for ISO 15118 are setting up an encrypted connection. So for DIN 70121, it's TCP. For ISO 15118, it's TLS. And then also exchanging certificates that identify the car and charger to each other. And those certificates are then verified on the backend system of the charger to make sure that the account is recognized and can be charged. So it's all of the same electrical steps, and the comms even look very similar, just with a couple of added things for ISO to do plug and charge.
How does NACS either differ or has potentially influenced the ISO 15118 standards? Because there are a lot of things that are very different between the Tesla and the Tesla chargers, and like from the cables to, like we were talking about the plug and charge, how seamless that works because they're sort of all vertically integrated. But at the same time, it seems like NACS is becoming the new next de facto standard here in North America, right? So it's, until the next version comes out after that, whatever the new plugs are going to be, and who knows how long that's going to take, but
hopefully we stop at some
that's
point.
Going to be. Yeah. It reminds me a lot of like the phones, right? And going from USB and the Apple connectors, and then eventually Apple frustratingly going to USB-C.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite, right? For a long time, Tesla was kind of regarded as the Apple of EVs. And unlike the actual Apple, they won the connector war.
Yeah. But at the same time, right, there has been this consolidation to standards, right? I mean, that were more open. And then I think with the latest incentives from the government, they opened up ACS so they can get from some government funding. And now that might be going, but it's already happened, right? The effects have already happened. People are going to NACS. They're seeing other benefits, just because there's so many superchargers already out there. How is that going to impact? You're talking about a pretty extensive protocol, and it makes sense, I think, in general, if you have as an open protocol for everybody to use. But now, everyone's kind of going to the Tesla standard. How does that look and compare to what you just talked about?
Yeah. So when NACS or NACS, as most of us have started calling it, as annoying as it kind of sounds, when it released, it was really just a PDF from Tesla with the specs of the connector. And that's largely what NACS is it's really just the connector. It shares the AC and DC pins, which is new. The old CCS connectors that most vehicles are still using that are non-Tesla have separate AC and DC power pens, but that's the main difference. Communication protocol wise, there's not a by definition difference. So what it did do though, it was very kind of frustrating. The industry consolidated around CCS. The government had gotten a bunch of industry feedback that said we all want CCS, and then Ford is the first domino to fall and announces an ACS. But what I ultimately realized is if we can change connectors so late in the game, then there are things that we can still do to other parts of the charging standards. So the general communication process between vehicle and charger has been the same for a long time. And a lot of the standards were written before there was mass adoption of EVs. And so they haven't necessarily thought of everything. There's some wiggle room in the standards, leads to some interoperability challenges. So while most of the NACS charging today is just normal ISO 15118-2 charging, and I'm pretty sure even in the one-off Tesla integrations that they're doing for each automaker, it's not that it's a proprietary Tesla communication protocol that the automakers are working at. It's mostly the business dealings involved with getting plugging charge set up. But the effort to standardize NACS does create some interesting openings. Like something that I was always frustrated with is, as an interoperability engineer, I want to know when I'm looking at charging data that I get from the field, I want to know what charger exactly this vehicle is plugged into if I have vehicle data. Or I want to know what car was having this issue that someone reported if they don't have the information on what car it was, if I'm looking at charger data. And something that I was always pushing with some of my coworkers at Rivian and different efforts within the SAE committee that was working on J3400 was, what if we had a message pair exchange where a vehicle says, "Hi, I'm a Rivian. I'm a 2022 Rivian R1T. I can speak these protocols," right? They already exchange what protocols they speak, but you add the model and it makes it clear, right? And the charger says, "Great, I'm a third generation Signet." And just that
they
is
have
enough
like a
information.
conversation, like
yeah, it sounds kind of silly, right? Like
yeah.
It's an introduction, but that piece of information fills a major gap on a debugging level. And so I don't think that made it into J3400. The effort to standardize NACS. There were some good improvements to the design overall, but I think that it blew up the industry just enough. It's enough where there's now more space to get kind of innovative with communication protocols as well.
That'd be pretty sick if they could like show those communications up on the infotainment of the car. It'll be like, hey, it's like, I'm a Porsche Taycan and I'm seeking 250 volts or more than that, 250 kilowatts I'm seeking, and then all that. That'd be pretty funny. So I think as we start to wrap up this conversation, what are some of the biggest hurdles you see with charging infrastructure, whether it's on the software side or just in terms of the number of charging stations available to use?
Yeah, I think right now the largest challenge with EV charging is not enough reliable stations. The majority of that gap in reliability is payment related. As much as I really want a good credit card implementation, that is not me saying that there are great examples of good credit card implementation right now. Most of them are old readers from the one company at the time that most of these chargers were installed had a weather rated reader that they could duct tape on or whatever they do. So I would say that the challenge is number of reliable chargers. There are a lot of chargers out there, but oftentimes it's one in a certain radius, and if that one doesn't work, you're SOL. And I think that it will be a little more difficult to get to that point if some of the incentives that we saw with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act are rolled back. I'm hopeful that those will be surviving vestiges, since so much of that money is managed by the states. Yeah, I think just number of chargers will be big, and also ease of experience is another great challenge, kind of like we were talking about earlier.
I totally agree. All right. Well,
Very
as we
cool.
all know, the EV industry is evolving and it's going to be interesting. We probably have this conversation a year from now, and a lot of the points we might have might be a little different.
Definitely. Yeah.
But regardless, yeah, thank you very much, Grayson. And what is the name of your consultancy group again? And how can people reach out?
Yeah. So it's EVision Solutions. We're on LinkedIn. You can find a link to our website and contact page there. Primarily focused at the moment, in part because these are the kind of clients that I can manage while I'm in grad school on more the technical advising side. So looking at how I can help companies in the charging space take in some of this customer feedback and experience feedback and design robust solutions, but definitely keeping an eye on fleet electrification, operations electrification in the future, and hoping to work with fleet operators to get as many electric vehicles on the road as we can.
Cool. And then when do you graduate from Georgia Tech again?
August.
August. All right.
Yes,
Well,
a
that
glutton
sounds
for
really
punishment.
exciting.
I'm back to Georgia Tech, but I'm enjoying it.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you guys.
Thanks.